Coming at you once again from the One Life Podcast, bringing to you the top 5. Coming at you with the top 5 hip-hop soloists of all time. Again, wanted to break down the top 5 greatest soloists of all time in hip-hop history for many reasons. First reason, most important reason, is hip-hop has affected everything in urban culture, in general culture, in international, whatever you want, however you want to break it down, hip-hop has had some sort of effect on pop culture, on politics, everything that you could imagine. So breaking down the top 5 soloists of all time is very important. Black people have a issue with diminishing their own value. So something as valuable as hip-hop, black people within the black community sometimes just look at it as, just some music that the young boys do, or they ridicule it, or they don't give it the attention that it requires. They don't understand the level of poetry that these artists display on an album by album basis. And I think it needs to really, really be held sacred. We need to really understand how valuable that this art actually is to our community and all communities. And we have to be proud that we brought this to all communities. We're giving people an opportunity to hear our poetry, to hear what we have to bring to the table, hear the descriptions and everything that hip-hop has to bring to the table. When I say descriptions of how we live, descriptions of all different types of communities. And hip-hop comes in all shapes, sizes, genders, nationalities, have all contributed to hip-hop. It was something that was brought to us from the American ghettos coming after the civil rights movement, the crack epidemic, and it just gave birth to this beautiful music. And there's so many positives to it. And a lot of times, more than not, what we do is, in the black community, all we want to talk about is all of the negative sides of hip-hop, all of what the artists are doing, or why this dude is mumbling, or why this dude is doing that. And I'm like, it's time to focus on the positives of hip-hop and all that it's brought, the many millionaires that it's created, a whole from the clothing industry, all different types of walks of life. It's helped benefit, you know what I mean? So I think that really needs to be highlighted. So that's what I wanted to bring to the table, and I wanted to start it off with the top 5, because again, that's the most important. These men have had the most influence and talent, in my opinion, to hip-hop, and they've contributed so much. So with that being said, I want to bring my number 2 artist, soloist in hip-hop history. This man has been in the game for a very, very long time. I will call him a master observer of the game, and he was able to apply all of the different elements that he's learned all throughout his career in hip-hop to become a lyrical business hip-hop master within the game. To be in the top 2, man, whether you're 1 or 2, you are a master, because there's been thousands and thousands of artists, groups, soloists, international, domestic, that have come in hip-hop. So within all these artists within the last 44 years, for you to be considered the top 2 is a feat within itself. So there's no shame in being 1, 2. At that point, it really doesn't matter. It's a matter of opinion at that point, because you were able to go through the gauntlet and battle your way all the way up to the top to be within the top 2. And again, my criteria for top 2, you need a catalog. You have to have a extensive catalog with all different types of songs and all different types of stories spanning over 20 years. You have to go through all of the walks of life: children, dramas, ups and downs, and money, breakups, legal issues. I'm not saying you have to go through legal issues. I'm just saying it just gives an example of you're able to fight through all of these trials and tribulations and still maintain your art, still maintain your talent, still maintain your integrity. So with that being said, my number 2 artist of all time is Jay-Z. Jay-Z has came to the game in 1996. He was introduced to the game to everybody with Reasonable Doubt. Reasonable Doubt is regarded amongst underground, commercial, everything as a hip-hop classic. One of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time. When it first came out, it kind of went under the rug a little bit. There was so much hard music at that time. You know, you had Outkast coming with Fire, AT Aliens, and all different types of music that they were coming to the game with. You had Nas. Nas came out with It Was Written at that time. You had Roots, you had Black Thought coming through with fire bars at that time. You know, you had you had Tupac coming with that double CD, coming with that fire, you know what I mean, before he passed, you know what I mean? God bless the dead. All of these different rappers that came at that particular moment in time. Wu-Tang was coming with Wu-Tang Forever. It was just ridiculous. I mean, there was so much competition at that particular moment in time that Jay-Z kind of went unnoticed. So it went about 6, 7, 8 months. People were listening, but they weren't really listening. You know what I mean? Then he had the single with Foxy. People was jamming to the single, bumping into it to the clubs. Biggie passed. There was a lot of sorrow in the air. And through all of that, you know, there was like an itch in people's ears. Like, yo, wait a minute. Did you hear that reason? Did you hear that Reasonable Doubt? And all of the singles on that album coming to all of them, let me not say singles, all of the songs on that album, Can I Live? Just how descriptive he was. He came into the game as a 26-year-old man, very, very mature in his lyrics, giving a full description of hustle life, business life, how to conduct yourself as a hustler. It was incredible. It was so dark and light at the same time. I don't know if I could explain to you how I felt as I kept listening to it, because off of first listen, it was okay. You know what I mean? Like, it was all right. Third, fourth, fifth listen, I'm just like, you started understanding the density of the man's lyrics and just where he was coming from and how different it was from his contemporaries at that time. I'm not going to say it was better, but it was very, very different. And he came to the game with just a different angle. You know what I mean? It was carried off of the bling era and the flashy era of Biggie, but he kind of came at it with his own twists. And I know a lot of people will debate me on this one, but on the track that him and Biggie had together, after a while, as you listen to it, I think he kind of ate Biggie, or he was on par with Biggie on that track. So he came into the game with that album, having Biggie on it, possibly eating Biggie's food, or at least competing with one of the guys that was regarded as top 2 at that moment, or top 3. And he came in and immediately came at it. And to his benefit and the fans' detriment, Biggie passed around that same time, which also helped Jay-Z propel to one of the top commercial artists at that time, because he was able to toe that line of commercial success and still be regarded as a great underground lyricist in underground circles. So he was able to really walk that fine line, which not many artists are able to do. Get respect from the underground and also get respect from the commercial crowd all at the same time. And he was able to maintain that throughout his career. When he followed up Reasonable Doubt with his second album, in my mind, was great, but it wasn't a classic. It was a good album, Volume 1. There was some solid songs on Volume 1. Solid album. A lot of standout joints on that album. But unfortunately, I would not call that album a classic. It was a good album. It helped carry Jay-Z. It helped propel the legend as we know of Jay-Z today, but it wasn't a classic. And he went back into the lab and came at the game again with Volume 2, which was a great album. His most successful album in terms of sales, selling 5 million copies. Had that Annie sample on that track. The track was dope. Had tracks on there with DMX, which was a cool joint. A lot of hot joints on that album as well. Really cool album. But again, it wasn't a classic. It was a solid album. Great commercial album. Had a lot of commercial singles, well placed. Did very well on the business side, being able to know what singles to drop, what type of features to have on the album. Again, this goes back to his business acumen. It just shows how great of a business/artist he was. But it wasn't a classic though. It wasn't. And at this time, people was loving Jay-Z, but he started slowly but surely with 2 albums in a row being dope commercially, but not really being classics at the same time. There was a lot of artists coming out still dropping classics. You know, you had the Talibs and Mos Defs, all of these different albums on the underground that was permeating and people were listening to. You had Ruckus Soundbomb, and you had all of these people still coming. You had Ghostface coming. He was at the top of his game at that time. So Jay was starting to push towards still having high-end or even higher-end commercial success, but in the underground, he started kind of losing a little bit of steam. People started loving Jay, but there was started to be in a couple of chinks in his armor. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, he's dope, but you know what I mean? He's always talking about this or he's always talking about that. At that time, Jay-Z came with Volume 3, which again was a better underground album than the previous two. Wasn't a classic, but was closer to a classic than those prior two albums, Volume 1 and 2. And it was the album where Jay-Z, you could hear that he was turning a certain corner. Came back with messing with Premier again. Coming with that, you know what I mean? Coming with that kind of street reasonable feeling again. It kind of had that feeling, but it was upgraded. It wasn't better, but you could hear the upgrade and growth in his music and growth in his lyricism at that time. And all you could think about is what's next to come. Like, okay, all right, Jay, you back officially. Then he came with the Dynasty, which to me is the greatest hip hop intro of all time. If anybody on this hasn't heard that intro, wow. Jay-Z came with that 1-2 and kind of reclaimed who he was and what he was going to be for the rest of his career on that Dynasty album. A very important album. Very important album in Jay's career. Turned the corner. Brought to the forefront Kanye West, Just Blaze, a new sound, a very big sound in hip-hop. I wouldn't say it was new, but he upgraded the old school sound of hip-hop that the Pete Rocks and the Premiers and the elements of hip-hop, the sound of hip-hop brought to the game. It was brought to RZA, let me not forget the RZA, was brought to the game, and Kanye and Just Blaze mixed with Jay-Z's lyrics and the other producers on that album started bringing something different. And Jay-Z's lyrics on that album were incredible. He had a lot of features. It was a group effort, you know what I mean? But if you just focus on Jay's lyrics on that album, you will hear the difference in the lyrics from that album from his previous albums other than Reasonable. It was a jump from it sounded like the album that should have came after Reasonable. Like, you know what I mean? If you were to just kind of cut out that little middle period of those 3 volumes of Jay and go from Reasonable to Dynasty, felt like, okay, now this is the guy I heard on Reasonable and took it to another level. And everybody was just like, wow, like this dude is coming. After that, he was feeling himself. You know, you had the Pharrell single, which was played so much my ears was bleeding. I couldn't take it no more. I liked it at first. Not gonna say I dislike it, but man, they ran that song to the ground. I'm sure Jay can't even hear that song no more. That song held it down for like 3 summers in a row. Incredible. At that time, man, you know, everybody was kind of crowning Jay at that time. You know, with that intro, with the group, he had the team behind him. You know, he had the momentum. He had successful albums. It was like his 4th album at that particular time, 4th, 5th album, and everybody's like, "Yo, is this the guy?" So, with that being said, you know what I mean? He had a couple of issues with other artists, Nas, Mobb Deep, all of these different artists, and he felt like this was the time that he was gonna officially highland the game and proclaim his mantle as king. Go grab it. It was that time. He had the albums, he had the time, he had the respect, and he had the money. So he went for the head of hip hop. He went for it. Went for it full-fledged. You know what I mean? Went to the battle, had the singles, and then it went downhill from there. Classic album. Blueprint was a classic album, official classic. But he came at Nas on that album, came at Mobb Deep. Had the song with M, where unfortunately, you know, one of our other top 5 artists of all time kind of brought it to Jay on that track, and which is incredible because typically when you hear two artists of that caliber and the artist actually sends you the verses first, like it's not like M tried to like wait till Jay did his verse. From my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, you know, correct me in the comment section, but my understanding is that him and Royce already had that song done already. Like that was already a song. You know what I mean? So he sent the song to Jay, probably added this and that to it. So Jay kind of already had the feel of what the song was gonna be, and he still couldn't eat M on the song. No disrespect to Jay, but you know what I mean? So you had the Nas situation plus that. So at that moment, backtrack a little bit for when Blueprint first dropped. You know what I mean? He had the Summer Jam screen. He destroyed Mobb Deep with that. Came at Nas, introduction to Coming at Nas, a small clip, let everybody know that, you know what I mean, asked Nas, he don't want it from Hove at that time. So everybody's just like, okay, he's coming at Nas. He came at Mobb, even though Mobb was close to the tail end of their career, but he came at Mobb. And the album was incredible, classic material. At this particular time, Jay-Z had it. He was the man. He had it all. Nas came back with the Ether, hit Jay with a real dent in his career, which is why he's number 2, by the way. Hit him with a real dent in his career. Lost the battle handily. You know what I mean? Like Nas gave it to him because Nas didn't just win. I've heard people say Nas was kind of rooted as the winner just because, you know, he was the underdog. No. Nas has always had different hate in his career. Nas won because Nas won, hands down. Like, you lost. After that, Jay came back with Blueprint 2, which was a dope album. Again, wasn't a classic. You know what I mean? A lot of attacks on Nas at that time and other artists in the game. Sounded a little bit bitter, but it was a dope album. Had some hot singles. Dope album. Then he started going on tour with the Roots band and kind of trying to go into a different direction. It almost sounded like a lot of the things that was said about him at that time he was taking heed to, and maybe within his own circle. So he did the little tour with the Roots, started kind of coming at the game a little bit differently at that time. Had the little R. Kelly, 2 albums in a row with R. Kelly at that time, which again wasn't a good time for Jay. Wasn't a good time. You know, a lot of things was going on. You know what I mean? So then it was 2 R. Kelly albums, beef with Nas, Blueprint 2. Still very successful. Still held all his lyrical skill, but he wasn't at the top image-wise. And he was coming off of a pretty bad battle. So then he came with his retirement album, which was the Black Album. Came at him again with another classic. Kanye and Jay was at it again at their best. Amazing album. Encore, all of these classic songs was on this album. Jay with his storytelling, Jay with his descriptions of what was going on in his life, giving you a full description of what he's done in his entire career. Mentioned other top 5 rappers on that album in a negative light. You know what I mean? Ask Common, I ain't been rhyming since Common Sense. You know, almost trying to take a shot at Common's paper. But we could all see Common's doing very well right now, and kind of showed the young youth trying to come into the game and do real hip-hop music that you could still be successful even with coming at the game without having popping bottles or talking about bling. Common showed that. So Jay came at it again with the follow-up album to that after he retired, which was Kingdom Come, which wasn't a classic, but it was showing the breakaway of him and Damon Dash, and kind of the breakaway of the old Jay, of the even though Jay was always materialistic, but just dealing with the Dame Dash and all of the other things that were going on in his past, being a father, being a husband, all the new Jay, the next era of Jay was born with that album, which was a decent album, wasn't a classic, you know? Jay followed it up with multiple albums after that, you know what I mean? Magna Carta, other albums, you know? Let me not forget the other album. After that, Jay-Z was really feeling himself at the top of the game. Everybody was talking about him. Singles was popping, multiple LPs in the game, classics under his belt. He felt like he was at the top of his game, and a lot of MCs were taking shots at this time. A lot of little subliminals in rhymes. A lot of little things were being said. And Jay-Z, being the competitor that he is, started taking shots back. Started thinking to himself, and probably within his own camp, that he could probably take over and end a lot of these rappers. And his actions on the follow-up LP after Dynasty, including the subliminals on Dynasty and freestyles all around that album from himself and other artists on his label, led everyone to believe that Jay-Z was at a point in his career where he was ready to take heads off and officially end the careers of the other rappers in the 90s and his peers, and take his place on Mount Rushmore officially. At this time, he came out with the Dynasty album. Before the Dynasty was the Summer Jam. At Summer Jam, he started coming at everybody. Let It Be Known had Michael Jackson with him, had his whole crew with him. And at this time, went on stage, blasted Mobb Deep, let the world know his number one competitor, Nas, he didn't want it with Hov. And everybody went crazy. Everybody wanted to know where Nas was at, what Nas' response was going to be, what Mobb Deep's response was going to be, and anyone else he named on that song. Everyone wanted to know what they were going to say. Because Jay-Z, being at the top of his game, being the number one commercial artist at that time, combination of street and commercial, took a shot at everybody. And right after that, dropped the Dynasty album. Dynasty album, the full song was on the album. All the shots at Nas and everybody else was heard. Everybody was like, Nas' career's over. And Jay-Z, for a moment in time, following the Dynasty album, following the Blueprint album, was on the top of his game. He was the man at that moment. Nas dropped a little single in between. A couple of subliminals, wasn't really saying much. And Jay-Z was riding high. Mobb Deep had a couple of things they were trying to come back with. Just wasn't enough. Jay-Z at that moment held the official crown, was the knockout king. If it was me, I probably wouldn't have commented or responded at that time, gave any of these dudes light. But, Jay-Z ain't care. And whether you call it a mistake, whether you call it just what it is, they're competitors. It was great for the game. Nas came back with the ether and officially won that battle, which was the first chink in Jay-Z's armor all throughout his career. He ran his career saying he will not lose. That was his mantra, and he lost. He followed it up with Blueprint 2. Blueprint 2 was not a classic. It was a solid album. A little bit of whining on the album. Sounded a little bit upset with the fans. Felt like he needed to remind everybody why he was the best. There's a lot of that on that album, but we all heard it. He officially lost the battle. And right after that, right during that time, he went on a little bit of tour with the Roots, was rocking Shake Rivera shirts. Seemed like he was just trying to find himself after the loss. Did a couple of LPs with R. Kelly. Looking back, we see how that went. Not to say that was the best idea. Had some issues with Dame. We seen issues amongst the label. A lot of different things were going on at that time. Right after that comes the Black Album. The Black Album was where Jay was proclaiming his retirement. Black Album was another pretty much classic or close to it. Great album. Him and Kanye again. Brought it back again. Encore. Dope singles. Dope LP. Everything about that album was hot. Jay-Z officially returned back to the game. Back to his form. But at this time he was retiring, unfortunately. But on his retirement, he came out on top. Retired back on top. Had the dope LP. Everybody was like, wow, this dude's back. It was dope. Right after that, Jay-Z comes back again. Comes back from retirement. Comes out with another album. Sounding very grown on the album. Dope album. A lot of very underrated album. I wouldn't call it a classic, but an extremely underrated album by Jay-Z. This was an extremely underrated album by Jay-Z, Kingdom Come, when he returned from retirement. That album had a lot of standout joints. Right after that was American Gangster, which was an official Jay-Z album, Jay-Z classic, arguably one of the best Jay-Z albums right after Reasonable Doubt. The album was just a masterpiece of lyricism, storytelling, production, stayed on topic, dope LP. Then we have Blueprint 3. We all know Blueprint 3, dope album. Had the joint with Alicia Keys, had the New York Anthem on there. Wouldn't call it a classic, but it was a dope album. You know, rounding it out with Magna Carta, which was a solid album. It was cool. You know, stayed on point, still lyrically potent. The only thing I could compare it to at that time was the 9, 10 Jay-Z albums prior to that. You know, if you compared it to his contemporaries at that time in 2013, he was light years ahead of his contemporaries at that time. So the only thing you could compare it to was the other members in his top 5 and his past work. Then we go to his follow-up last solo LP, which was 444, which some people say was a classic. I think it was solid. It was close to it. You know, one of Jay-Z's best, kind of coming to his own. One of Jay-Z's first, from top to bottom, I would call conscious albums and grown albums. Coming into his own as a grown man, a father, a husband. And with that being said, man, I'm going to end it like that. My number 2 artist of all time, Jay-Z. Jay-Z is definitely a top 5 MC, a top 2 MC. Had one of the greatest careers in music history, not just hip-hop history. Because just like I said, hip-hop is not just a genre anymore. It's a complete culture, and it took over the culture. So hip-hop is all of music right now. So Jay-Z is being number 2 on that list is incredible. And he's still going. You know what I mean? Let's see what he got next. So I'm going to end it like that. 1.